Welcome to the third part of a three-part series with the Institute of Liberal Values book club discussing Yasmine Mohammed's book, Unveiled. Please join in on March 2nd at 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. I hope I got that time right. For a live stream with the author and bring your questions, which I'm excited to have her answer for us. To begin, my name is Diana Blum. I'm a neurologist and a fond member of the Institute of Liberal Values, which really focuses on classical liberal values that shape our Western culture. With me today is Wink and Mars, good friends and fellow classic liberal value enthusiasts. So I'm just going to jump right in with a little bit of background on the difference between love and power frameworks, because when I was reading Yasmine's book, the thing that, as a mother, the thing that really got to me was, how is this mother not putting the love of her child ahead of anything else? Because, I mean, that's the mother instinct. And that got me thinking more about what's happening in our schools today. That's kind of a side passion of mine because I am a neurologist. I very much care about the developing brain and how kids are wired with what basically they're exposed to and what they practice. And many schools and academic institutions today fixate on power lens thinking, dividing the world into rigid categories of oppressors and oppressed. In this model, moral complexity disappears. There is no forgiveness, no redemption, no shared humanity, only domination or submission. The same power lens is what prevents Muslim women like Muhammad from being defended. If criticism of Islamism is framed as an attack on a protected group, then women suffering under Sharia become invisible. Their pain becomes politically inconvenient. Love-based frameworks, on the other hand, prioritize dignity and inherent worth of the individual. Love acts as a restraint on power. It soothes fear, advances equality before the law, and demands moral accountability. So, Yasmine describes being forced to veil as a young child, not for her protection or dignity, but to control male desire and enforce obedience. That's what she talks about. I think it's in the early part of the book, pages like 18 to 20, 25, something like that. So my first question to you guys is, how does this scene illustrate a power-based moral system where responsibility is placed on the powerless rather than the powerful? And a second part to it, I'll just throw it out there. In a love-based framework, who would bear more moral responsibility here? And how would the outcome be different? Mars, you want to take that one? Or Wink, you guys? I'm curious where you...
Good, Mars. I defer.
Yasmine's book was, for me, like, well, it's not just for me, but for everyone here and for many, many people, it was a very, very difficult read. We see the struggles of her mother, and she seems to have just been this incredibly neurotic woman who almost seemed to be trying to get some grasp of power herself, to get some kind of control over her own life, and she just really exerted it in a horrible way to her own children. The way you read the book, and she was one of the most disgusting people to have. Every time I saw her come up with the book, I'm like, oh no, what is she going to do now? And but it just seemed to me that she was trying to grasp at straws to get to have some kind of grasp over her own life, and she really had to just abuse her children to do so, and she did so in some of the most in the craziest ways. I'm really skipping ahead to the ahead in the book here, but I remember when Yasmin was forcibly married to that former member of that not former that member of Al Qaeda, and Yasmin was pretty much doing all the house chores in the house. She was preparing some kind of soup from the and he was very particular about how I liked it prepared. They were out they I forgot how the story went, but when it was finally served, and I think he started splitting the contents out, but they were filled with all this gunk that she had to take out of the she was that came out when she was preparing it, and she was like, "Well, that wasn't inside there when I made it." And she looked at her mom, who was trying to hold back laughter. But what was so funny about that? Because under fundamentalist Islam, a man is allowed to beat his wife. And this man who had been abusing Yasmin actually, I think in the book that he actually saw that her mother was trying to screw her over, and in a very one of those very strange twists of fate, he was actually a little bit more merciful than she was when she was actually enjoying her daughter's discomfort. How crazy do you have to be to wish that on a child? And that's definitely not love. That's definitely, I don't care where you come from. That's definitely not a love-based framework. That's just really an exertion of power over someone who's helpless, in an incredibly compromised position to assert themselves. That's I don't have any words to describe it myself. I do, but they're not, it's not appropriate.
So, I think when I look at the interaction between Muhammad and her mother, I think that her mother, after leaving Muhammad's father, I think that she fell into this psychological space or mental space of being a born-again Muslim. And as a born-again Muslim, she allowed external forces, precepts, doctrines, dogmas, to define for her what it meant to be Muslim, what it meant to be a practitioner of Islam. And sadly, I think that allowed, that sort of squeezed out the natural maternal instincts her mother should have felt for her daughter. And what's particularly pernicious about it is it's not just the displacement of maternal love by raw power over a daughter. It's also the knockoff effects, the denial of the daughter's human dignity, the daughter's individual worth. One of my, I wrote a essay about this, and to me, one of the most stirring aspects of this interaction, this relationship between the mother and daughter, it wasn't just that the mom was practicing raw radical Islam to the detriment of her daughter. It was more that the mother, as a born-again Muslim, was in a space where she totally misread her daughter. Her daughter is a human individual. And that's probably one of the worst things you can do, I think, for someone, is to misread who they are. Because as a result, the daughter, in this case, Muhammad, ended up swallowing her pain. And I'm not a psychologist, but it seems to me that there are a few things more corrosive of the individual sense of self than swallowing one's pain as a little kid. So those are my thoughts, Diana.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is love-based frameworks center the vulnerable child, right? A power-based framework is going to center protecting the authority of belief. Love-based societies hold that human dignity precedes culture, and power-based societies treat culture as a shield against accountability. And you saw that time and time again as she tells her story. The other thing that this book, reading this book, brought up for me is how there's like a sanctifying of suffering, or a glorification of victimhood in certain cultures, and sadly, we're seeing this now unfold in Western cultures under the guise of, being compassionate. But is it really compassionate when you are condoning and sometimes even elevating suffering? So, Yasmin actually writes, suffering is framed as virtuous, necessary, or even God ordained. There's a normalization of pain, fear, and punishment in her household. That was kind of pages 60 to 75 is
Mhm.
those themes. So, my next question is kind of what distinguishes a culture that sanctifies suffering from one that seeks to minimize it, as we talked about in Empowered Humanity Theory, our last book club discussion here. How does framing suffering as spiritually meaningful protect systems of power from moral scrutiny? And my big question, because I think it's very relevant to today's times between what's happening in Iran right now and the massacres in Israel, can peace and equality exist in systems where human relationships are defined primarily by domination rather than mutual dignity? Because that is ultimately.
Diana, this may surprise you. I was a little surprised because in preparing for this session, I thought, well, maybe I need to learn a little bit more about love cultures and power cultures so that I can sound intelligent and articulate. So I did a little bit of research with AI this morning, and I asked AI, what is the difference between mainstream Islam and radical Islam? And I got an interesting answer because, of course, I heavily value, as we all do, human dignity, creative expression, and individual. Well, the AI model told me, in no uncertain terms, that mainstream Islam emphasizes the essential equality of all humans before God, regardless of race or faith. And that seems to be a little bit disconnected from the lived experience of Mohammed in her book, Unveiled. And I wasn't really quite sure what to make of that. I wasn't, because there are, let's say there are nearly 1 billion people on the planet who utilize AI tools to better understand the world. So if a typical person just plugged in a prompt, explain for me mainstream Islam and its relationship to the essential equality of all humans before God, they would come away thinking, wow, that sounds like a really peaceful religion rooted in equality of mankind. We know from Muhammad's memoir that is not true necessarily. And so that kind of troubled me because, and it goes to your larger question about the things happening in public schools these days. If you have devices and models that can kind of frame reality for people, what are the knockoff consequences of that? I mean, I could easily have left my session this morning thinking, oh, well, my fears were overblown. Mainstream Islam is all about equality of mankind and we're all equal in God's sight. I thought that was kind of chilling. What are your thoughts on that? How we can kind of be misled by the framing?
Well, I mean, this goes back to my issues with AI because I feel garbage data in equals garbage data out. I just had a whole back and forth with another neurologist on LinkedIn about neurodegenerative disorders, so it have nothing to do with this. but same concept is who is feeding the thinking, who is teaching AI that that's the case, because it is so disconnected from the reality of what is happening in this world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
if lived experience of harm cannot be discussed because it implicates an ideology, then the ideology has been placed beyond moral scrutiny, right? And that's a
Right.
power move, not compassion. That is a power move.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Love asks, is this right? Power asks, is this permitted, and who gets to decide? And in the world of AI, it's whoever's manning AI decides. And that's really
Right.
scary to me. I don't know what the answer. I mean, I'm here in Silicon Valley, right? And
Yeah.
this is why I want to leave this toxic environment, because
Hmm.
they think the answers are within AI, but it's like, no, who is, it's very scary. So Mars,
It
you're
is.
the techie person.
Yeah.
Tell us, answer for us here.
I have my own concerns with AI for the moment, with how it's going to reshape the economy, but that's not what we're talking about here. Um, the main question is something I found. I think it's really, really interesting, because this is actually one of my pet hobby horses. I like to study. I really want to. I really study the issue of morality and whether or not it's objective and subjective. We can get into another time. I do tend to lean towards objectivity with certain caveats. Um, but when we're going into the subject of cultures, is the one that values suffering just for the sake of suffering, when one that seeks to alleviate it. I think you have to look at the specific moral frameworks that make up these specific cultures that you're into. You see fundamentalist religions like fundamentalist Christianity and fundamentalist Islam, especially. There's a Ramadan just started, and never mind. I'm putting words. I'm getting way ahead of myself here. I think there's a ritual in Shia Islam in which there's I don't remember the actual circumstance, when like they're celebrating, not celebrating, they're commemorating the death of one of their imams, the ones that took over after Muhammad, when there was a split between Sunni and Shia, when these people turn and self-flagellate. Once during this ritual that happens, like, I think once a year or something of the sort. You see um, people intentionally making themselves suffer needlessly, like dressing a woman completely in a habaya, a hijab, or whatever, and just they're not much more than just baby making machines. You also see such a similar circumstance in Christianity, in which you see the story about Adam and Eve, in which like God threw them out of the garden and said, like, you are meant to suffer, you're meant to labor.
Mm.
And somewhere in the intervening years between when Christianity first started to all the way to the modern era, like there were a lot of issues with women taking pain blocker medications when she was giving birth, because no, you're supposed to suffer, you're supposed to go through this pain because God ordained it. You had these fundamentalist belief systems structuring their idea of what it means to suffer, what their purpose is, what the greater good is for for their version of what they consider morality. What do you do in this life to be rewarded in the next? And then, like, since we're talking about liberal values, we talk about the Enlightenment. We start studying the idea of these moral philosophers who start talking about what is morality. How do you arrive at morality through reason? And you see instances of this going back all the way through ancient Greek philosophy, all the way starting from the Socratic dialogue, Euthyphro, and you move forward to someone who is like Immanuel Kant, who starts talking about his ideas of the categorical imperative, deontology. You do something right because it's your duty.
Mm.
And then you finally move forward to someone like John Stuart Mill, who has the philosophy of utilitarianism, when she's talking about the greatest happiness principle, and when you're actually actively trying to reduce suffering. You have you try to you put your stake in the ground as to what you want to, in which you want to base your moral systems on, and that stake inevitably is what will ultimately derive all your moral systems, all your beliefs, all your actions off of. It depends on where you put that stake. I'll touch upon my pet hobby horse for a minute and say that I don't necessarily believe morality is 100% objective. I think there is something to be said there, but the consequences that fall forth from where you put that stake, those are objective, and those will ultimately decide whether your society is one that values life, flourishing, happiness, is the one that just fetishizes suffering, and where you put those stakes matter. And again, like, where I think objectivity has its place is where the consequences stem from. You have to be very, very careful when you want to put that stake, and whether you want to arrive to that through reason or through fundamentalist beliefs. And that's what ultimately divides Western civilization from others. We don't have it perfect, but I think we have a very good compass as to how to arrive at a much better position. And if you say it's better, I think if you think there's no such thing as better, I think that's a really disingenuous answer.
Mars, let's assume in the West we have a love culture, or more of a love culture than in other parts of the world. How do we properly understand suffering in the context of a meta love culture?
Can you be more specific?
Sure. So if our stake in the ground for our moral framework is rooted in love, love being human dignity, love being individual worth, love being the golden rule, how does someone in that moral framework with that stake, how do you understand what's the appropriate place of suffering? Because there is suffering in the world, even in a love culture.
Sure.
People have cancer, people have illness, people die, they lose their fathers, they lose their mothers. I guess what I'm getting at is, how does one rooted in a love culture perceive and navigate suffering in the world?
I don't want to put words in your mouth, Wink. So let me ask you a question to make sure we're on the same page first. Are you talking about like I said something earlier in that I don't think morality is necessarily objective, but the consequences that stem forward from it are those consequences. What results from those decisions you make where you put the stake, those are objective. We have to choose very, very carefully about how we decide to navigate to those two poles. Are you talking about like what distinguishes what is derived from those poles from where the stake is driven, and how to distinguish between one that is that's love driven as opposed to one that's just meant for suffering?
Or one that's just meant for power. So you have two different stakes, one love culture, one power culture. How does one understand suffering if you're in the love culture stake framework?
I think if I can jump in just for a second,
Sure.
I think it goes back to our, in a love culture, you want to ease suffering. You
Yes.
know, and honestly, like as humans, our natural tendencies, if is to, you want to ease somebody else's suffering because that will make you feel better.
Right. Well, there's your heart goes out to someone who is bleeding, or someone who took a stumble and fall, or someone who lost everything in a wild night on Vegas. Your heart goes out to them, and so you're suggesting that's part of how we navigate suffering in love culture. That visceral sense of your heart going out to them, to wanting to ease their suffering, or at least sympathize with their suffering.
And this brings me to the question of why are Muslim women so often denied the same universal protections to ease their suffering that others just are granted, that we take it for granted, right?
That's a deep point, because I'm suggesting that visceral urge to feel in the presence of suffering is almost part of the human condition. It's almost instinctive. So you're suggesting there's something going on here that is mucking up the works.
And I think it's this power lens. I think it's this moving away from love into power, right?
It has more to do with epistemology than it has to do with I'm getting ahead of myself here. Like it depends on what kind of epistemological lens you're looking at morality with. Because, all right, in fundamentalist Muslim societies, like, okay, so let's go back to the subject of Israel for a second. You have a child that blows himself up or does something to kill a bunch of Jews in Israel. Again, I'm not saying every Muslim does this. That's if someone says that, that's disgusting.
Right.
Okay. But in fundamental societies, when that happens, what occurs among the societies? Is it celebrated?
Yes.
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 They're martyrs.
They probably got shot themselves all the way up to heaven because of what they did. All right. So you might be suffering in the moment, but if your belief framework is that you're a reward in the afterlife and you're suffering now, that's like saying someone goes into the gym and like is suffering because they're working themselves out for a benefit later on down the line. If you believe in that particular framework, then you are going through all those depredations, preserving beliefs from the 7th century, or even in other Abrahamic religions from the from way back when. You are pretty much just working off a belief system that will reward you later on. Now, if we're talking about like what is going to help you prevent suffering in this life or whatever, there are objective ways that we know people suffer. Look, study someone's brain states when they're depressed. What are the dopamine levels going on inside their head? Are they happy? Is their body functioning in a state that allows them to experience happiness? Are they on a high? Are they joyful? Is someone in a state of pain? Is someone suffering? There are objective consequences that drive forward from this. And how do you distinguish between one culture and another? What does each culture value? Where's the stake, and what kind of epistemological process do you use to illustrate what is suffering at that time, and how do you alleviate it from there? One culture with these kind of beliefs will change their frameworks, will adapt their actions to get to their goal, to paradise, whatever, and they'll follow fundamentalist beliefs and practices that we think are crazy, but they look at us and think that we're the crazy ones because we'll be burning the hellfire afterwards. Well, we're actually taking methods, barometers that are derived from the scientific method to calibrate, to readjust, and to get us on a much straighter beeline towards what we consider to be the alleviation of suffering, the celebration of love, everything that makes human life worth experiencing. And those are and that is what the delineation is between one culture and another.
If I see someone walking down the street in San Diego, or if I see someone on a podcast in Qatar and they're wearing the veil, should I viscerally feel their suffering, or should I viscerally feel they're at peace with their decision, or is there no way for me to know? Because they could be like Muhammad, outwardly wearing the veil, but inwardly suffering. I think about that, Mars, sometimes. I was watching a podcast last night, and it was a wonderful podcast about AI and its acceptance in Qatar. And Qatar, as you may know, is in the Middle East. And I found myself looking at the crowd, and I would say maybe half of the women were wearing the veil. Now, they weren't self-conscious that they were wearing the veil, but I found that I was, having read Muhammad's book, because I began to think, I wonder how many of them secretly would prefer not to, but would never broach the thought. What do you think about that, Mars?
I think they don't know what they're missing. If you're in a culture in which that's just the norm, you'll never you step out into the sunlight, and you don't know what that feeling is like. You don't know what it's like to be free. You don't know what it's like to explore your capabilities as a human being.
Even if half of the other women are not wearing the veil, and one of the co-hosts had the longest mane of Floyd hair imaginable. And I just thought, wow, this is interesting. Two different mental universes coexisting on the same stage.
Two completely different mental universes. I need to find the name of that film and present it here sometime. There was a film talking about this woman who escaped fundamentalist Judaism in New York, and she walked down to the world for the first time and went through just a complete culture shock.
I think I remember the movie. I think I remember that. Yeah.
I think it's called Orthodoxy or something like that. And like she was going out into a world that when she had never experienced before, where she has freedom as a woman.
Right.
She's having all these experiences that she never would have had in the kind of fundamentalist culture, and like
Right.
it was such a culture shock to her, and she was experiencing life outside of that cloistered community. So you don't know. I would say, like, you don't know what you're really missing, and you don't know what's being taken from you under the aegis of this kind of just restrictive culture and conditioning that you've been under. You might want it, but you might want it for reasons you have not considered, you have not thought through, you have not been able to experience in your life, and you might want to impose that on other people because it's just the way things are.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it was just so fascinating to me because I just wondered, are they even conscious of the issue that I'm perceiving from 10,000 miles away in San Diego?
You
It's that movie Orthodoxy is a good one to look at
Yeah.
to get a perspective on that. But like if you ever had the chance, I'd really recommend reading Megan Phelps Roper's book Unfollow, because she has some experience with that herself. Like when she met her future husband through X,
Right.
and when she eventually left, I think she had to challenge a lot of her previous preconceptions about, like, what the outside world is like.
Diana, you were going to jump in.
I think you nailed it when you said conscious, because love requires a freedom of consciousness, right? Power rebrands compliance as
Oh,
consent.
that's deep. That's deep.
Love names harm clearly, whereas power sensitizes language to maintain control, right? So these women who are veiled, how much of it is, out of fear? Because the threat of violence, as Mohammed talked about all throughout her book,
Mhm.
the fear of, punishment for just questioning leaving Islam, right? That
Mhm.
fear. It's the erasure of individual worth. It's like the opposite of human dignity, right? So I actually had a question on this. What does it say about a moral system when belief must be enforced rather than chosen? Can love exist in a system where leaving is treated as betrayal, deserving of punishment? These were my questions because you nailed it with the consciousness question.
Well,
How
I mean, I think those power systems that rely upon control and dominance are essentially dehumanizing, because essential to humanity, I believe, is choice, is agency, is selfhood, is personhood, is self-consciousness, is self-awareness, all those things. Those are all of the things that separate us from mere rocks on the ground, from your tools in the tool shed. They even separate us from Claude in Silicon Valley. We have the ability to perceive the world through sight, through smell, through taste, through sound. Humans are complex, and I think sometimes we underestimate that the most important sense need not be those physical senses, but the temporal sense of self-consciousness, right? Because from that, all things flow, if you think about it that way. Yeah. What do you think, Mars?
Can you repeat the question?
I think it's more, just a reflection, right? I mean, the way I see it is love tells the truth even when it's uncomfortable, right? Power polices speech to preserve authority. Like that's, I'm trying to like delineate what are the fundamental differences and why Islam, and that's not to say Muslims, but Islam as a faith, as I don't know if it's a faith or a culture, but as an entity is so disconnected from Judeo-Christian frameworks, which is the basis of enlightenment and Western culture.
So you draw no distinction between radical Islam and mainstream Islam in this analysis?
I I think fundamentally because Islam is based on a power structure,
Okay.
it's degrees of, but ultimately it is not based in a love-based framework. It isn't. It's about submission. It's, if you read the Quran, it's very much a power-based lens, and that's fundamentally very different than what our Western values are based on, right? Love-based ethics are expandable and inclusive, whereas power-based ethics require enforced compliance.
Right.
There's no
Force for compliance.
right. So
Like a good Marxist,
no,
like a good dogmatist. Yeah.
and that's why it's very scary when we see the West try to, through this cultural relativism lens, embrace, or condone a power-based system, which is so fundamentally not congruent with humanity. I mean, that's where I'm at this point when I
Oh, that's fine.
more,
That's fine.
I mean, I have a few more questions that I put together, like, why does a power-based worldview leave no room for forgiveness, redemption, and moral growth?
So,
Why?
so Diana, if I were to use the powers of Star Trek, if I were to transport you to that stage that I saw in Qatar, would you have felt at peace, at ease, or would you have felt energy which was perhaps threatening or scary? I'll put it that way. Would you have felt energy that was a little scary or threatening, or would you have felt at peace?
I have felt energy that is threatening and scary. I've
Mhm.
visited some of those,
Place.
places, exactly, and and look at what happened. Look at what is happening in the Taliban right now in Afghanistan when they took over. I
Mhm.
mean, like, girls right now, they've condoned beating as long as you don't break bones, right? That was the most recent. As long as
As
you
long
don't
as you,
break bones, beating your wife is totally acceptable.
then we're good. We're good. Yeah.
Like,
That's,
like
that's medieval. It's a little bit on the barbaric
that's
side.
literally,
It's
well, barbarism. And if you look at
right.
the October 7th massacres, if you look at what's happening in
Yeah.
Nigeria with the Christian, I
Yeah.
mean, it is barbarism. But
Yeah.
we have to call it out. We can't, this is what I mean about language manipulation is
Yeah.
no, we have
Yeah.
to call out what it is.
Well, devil's advocate, someone would say, but Diana, you have to treat people as individuals. So you shouldn't presume some worldview just because a teenager or a young woman wears the veil. For all you know, that person may be a fellow dissident, a fellow nonconformer. She's just playing the game to get along. What your response to that possible critique? That
Oh, on
you
an
might be
individual
misreading.
base,
Hmm.
right. On an individual basis, I think we need to engage every individual and ask. But if someone is, if someone is forced into compliance, um, I think you can read there's a hesitancy, and usually it's just not speaking, just succumbing to
Mm,
um,
mm,
the
the
situation.
the not speaking, and to me, that was one of the frightening things in Muhammad's book. Is there's this acceptance of segregation between Muslims and non-Muslims,
Mhm.
and how can you have a better world and create better understanding if you impose this wall between the ins and the outs, between the believers and the non-believers? It's the opposite of let's all get along, a la Rodney King. It's sort of the more we remain separate and cast stones at the non-believers, the sooner we'll reach the what is it called? The paradise afterwards, the afterlife or whatever. Yeah, that's not like if you just happen to not be a Muslim, that's not a particularly inviting worldview to encounter on a daily basis, shall we say. So,
There was
That
actually an
depends
ex.
whether or not you're. That depends entirely whether or not on the kind of Muslim you're referring to, though.
hmm
Christianity
hmm
and Judaism have largely been reformed. They don't resemble their original incarnations. That's where we disagree a little bit. Western morality, in my opinion, is not based on the Judeo tradition. It evolved because Judeo Christian traditions were humble. You have
Yes.
you see a lot of fundamentalist Muslims today who follow that idea that you cannot be friends with people outside the religion.
right.
On the other hand, there are many of those who follow a foreign version of their faith who are very welcoming, very wonderful people
hmm hmm
who are incredible. I've had the privilege of, well, the other podcast I run, like, no, I can't sing her praises enough. The all time favorite interview I've ever done is the one with Rahil Raza, a lovely, lovely
hmm
Muslim woman who I just
hmm
very, very much enjoyed speaking with. I think her heart's in the
Yeah.
right place. I think she's doing great work. Incredible woman who, I
Mariah
hope
Dean as well.
someday I can someday Soraya, of course, Soraya, yeah, and
Sarah
so
Hayter is wonderful.
and
And
but the thing is, like, with all due respect to these individuals, like, I completely support their efforts to reform their religion, to move it into the modern 21st century, as park several beliefs that they have to park at the edge of that time of that world. But like those a lot of the fundamentalism has to drop away.
Mm.
You cannot practice 7th century Islam or Wahhabism or the what there's 4 schools of jurisprudence in Islam. One of them feels Wahhabism. You have to drop those in order to move them into the 21st century. The fundamentalism has to go, like they have with Christianity and Judaism. Judaism has mostly moved into the 21st century. Christianity has one foot inside there. It's mostly there. Islam has one foot in there and is back. So that reformation or apostasy has to take place.
But it
But
takes
like,
a lot
so
of courage if you're the individual person, right? The individual
yes,
Muslim.
yeah, and we have a lot of Muslims who are pushing for this reformation as well.
Yeah.
So
right.
we go into here's where we go back into the idea that you're talking about, like, judging individuals not by not as a group whole, because as not all Jews and Christians practice the same way, neither do all Muslims. If you ask Ben Shapiro what he thinks about gay marriage, you'll get a very, very different response from someone like him, as opposed to someone who comes from the denomination of the faith. Like Barry Weiss is married to Danelli Bowles. It's a homosexual relationship. I don't think Ben would agree with that.
I don't think. I think he would
Well,
accept.
he wouldn't cast her out from the Jewish faith, correct?
Correct. I think he would accept and embrace it, even though he may not agree with it for himself or his children, maybe. Although this is where I think a love-based culture would win over him, because if one of his children came out as a homosexual, I think his love for that child would, even though it goes against perhaps his, Judaism beliefs,
It's that
I think it,
paternal instinct. It's that
I like
natural instinct
exactly.
to love.
And I want to just read something, because I want to give I meant actually to start with this paragraph from her book. It's page 164. She talks about this disconnect of love, and it's the scene when she's changing the diapers. I don't know if you guys remember this, but where her husband, the Al Qaeda guy, says anytime he sees the baby being changed, he gives this mantra: wear new clothes, live with gratitude, die a martyr.
Yes.
And
Yes.
remember that? And
I
so
remember that.
she says, I did everything I could to avoid changing her in front of him. I have since seen videos of men sending their little children, like Trojan horses, to die as martyrs in suicide bombings. That is the power of brainwashing. It overrides your natural instinctual human reactions of love and empathy. It
Mm.
demands that you suppress these instincts. It demands that you act in an immoral and corrupt way towards your children, because that is what Allah wants. You have to overcome your most basic instinct to protect your child in order to meet the demands of the religion. So that that's what got me thinking about all of this, love and
Yeah.
power, and because it came straight from her and how
Yeah.
she reflected. And at the same time, the next page she writes, I named my baby after my mother. It was my last ditch attempt at winning her love. So the difference between Yasmin is she believes in a love culture. That is what ultimately I feel gave her the strength to separate, is the love for
Mm.
her own child, something
Mm.
she never got as a child herself.
Wow.
So,
There's some
so going back to Ben, I think because Judaism is at the end of the day a love culture, we are still open to humans that maybe live in a way that maybe we disagree with, whatever. There's rules, but love overcomes.
I think he would agree to a certain extent, but to what, I'm not sure. He's been welcoming to other people who are different in that respect. But yeah, I respect Ben Shapiro, even though I don't always agree with him. I think he has a fairly decent moral core. We will probably disagree epistemologically and definitely in certain policies, but he he's shown many times that in several respects he's fairly reasonable.
Do you know Chloe? Chloe, and I can't remember her last name, but she's the enchantment theory. Yes. So I was watching the Glenn Lowry show last night, just in passing, and she was one of the guests on the show, and they hadn't met in years. There was a previous podcast involving Brett Weinstein years ago, but they were talking, and Glenn noticed that her name was different. Her name was Chloe Simon. And he just, as a side mention, oh, your name has changed. Your name is different. And she didn't really say much about that. And for those who may not be aware, Chloe is Jewish, I believe. I believe she's Jewish. Okay. And so he asked her, how are things going for her? And she says, well, I've been mourning a lot. I've been going through a lot of mourning and loss. And you could tell she didn't really want to say more, but I think she felt welcome and embraced by the warmth of Glenn. And so she took a deep breath, and she said, well, I came out to my parents as bi, and they disowned me. Right. And that's why, I changed my last name. And I just thought to myself, Diana, you were suggesting Judaism perhaps is more accepting, but here is a very prominent Jewish influencer who was just disowned because she came out as bi. How do you understand that or reconcile that?
Yeah, that's really tough because it sounds like the love in her family is conditional, which it saddens me. I mean, that's not to say there's not going to be exceptions to the rule, just like there's plenty of Muslims that live in a love culture. I'm not here to say that all Muslims, are rigidly in Islam, which is a power culture.
Yeah.
But that doesn't,
Right.
there's always going to be those exceptions. And I feel for her. I mean, that saddens
Glenn
me.
had the same reaction you did, the same reaction, because, it's the year 2026. And, from what I can tell, Chloe's a great person, very influential, trying to bring into creation a better sense of humanity and the human condition. And it goes back to the parental instinct and the maternal instinct of all the people you would hope would have your back. When you're most vulnerable, you would think it would be your parents. So
I think there's something else here. Like when I was talking about earlier, like what determines one culture from another depends on your epistemological frameworks. Okay, when you love someone, you effectively want what's best for them and everyone else around you, correct?
Right.
Okay. Well, what determines what's best for everyone around you? You have to consider the consequences of all the actions you take in this life. Someone who comes from Chloe's parents sound to me they still have some foot in fundamentalist Judaism. Homosexuality is not a Judeo-Christian value. It's not. So like if she's going to expel, if she was expelled from her family, or not expelled, that's too strong a term, but
Just
if she
what's the word she
is
is.
disowned by her family
Yeah.
because and they love her, well,
Right.
what does
Right.
that say about you and your belief systems? And you see some repetition of this across the board through all these other religious societies, like from the Amish. You're given the ability, you're given the option of exploring the outside world. If you want to leave, you're not let back in. Mary Roper's book, when she was a part of the Westboro Baptist Church, listen to her talk about her family, her brothers, like they from all this everything they talk about. She actually comes from a fairly loving household within that cloistered community. But when she decided to leave, she was expelled from her family. She has no contact with them whatsoever. I don't know if things have changed, but like more and more people have come out. Why? You don't want your beliefs. You don't want these new ideas, these new beliefs to corrupt this system. Because if you believe in a heaven and in hell, you believe that certain actions are good and evil, holistic or non-holistic. That kind of system of belief will take you away from that, and therefore you aren't effectively not working in the best interests of the people around you. Whereas you go to the Enlightenment framework, if you wrestle with moral dilemmas through reason and through reason as through Socrates' Euthyphro, you think about what does it mean to bring about the greatest happiness. How far do you take the ontological ethics? How far do you think like moral philosophy should be followed, moral values should be followed through duty? Where are the gray areas here? And then it becomes a system of checks and balances where you have to carefully calibrate your moral responses towards bringing about the greatest happiness. And greatest happiness is determined specifically through mental states, through the states of conscious human beings who experience suffering and well-being. So the idea that you live in a love culture, I don't necessarily agree with that term, because love does not exist outside of epistemological or lawful frameworks. There's this okay, let me give you another example. There's a statement in the Quran called, "Whoever has killed an innocent person has killed the rest of the universe." What does innocent mean in fundamentalist Islam? If you blaspheme against the Prophet, you die. Okay, that is not innocent. Can you take that word innocent and apply it to a 21st century framework where you're not living in the 7th century anymore? What does love mean in the Christian Judeo frameworks if you live in that kind of belief system? They're not compatible.
Mm-hmm. Diana, jump in. You were going to say something. I'm eager to know what you were going to say.
Well, I'm debating whether or not I want to share too much personal. But I I haven't talked to my own dad in almost 5 years, and it's not actually more than 5 years now. And it's not because I don't love him, and I still believe he loves me. It's that I disobeyed him. It's that I disappointed him. I think I mentioned in our first recording that, when I had a roller coaster of emotions reading Yasmine's book, even though I was never physically abused.
Right.
I was, the total, but it was an emotional control, which can be toxic in other ways, right? And it was finally breaking free to be the mother I need to be for my children that created this disconnect. And I still have, and this is what I want to end on because I'm also looking at the time. I still have hope for my relationship with my dad. I do. And I have hope for Chloe and her parents. I don't know Chloe. I mean, I know of her and her enchantment theory, and I respect her a lot. And I have hope. And the reason I'm bringing this up or concluding, I think it's perfect, because on page 270, Yasmine talks about her final message, and it is of hope, right? Her closing reflections are a framework of her journey as a movement toward life, autonomy, and truth. So I'm just going to read the last paragraph here. I hope I've gotten my message across. I hope that people will start to assess one another and deal with one another based on ideas and not identities. I hope that when people meet a girl being beaten by her family, they won't bow down to the ethnicity of her parents. I hope they will realize that all little girls bruise, regardless of ethnicity. I hope they understand that justifying the beating because of the ethnicity of her parents will condemn her to a life of physical and psychological torture that will stay with her until the day she dies, regardless of the color of her skin. I hope they will choose to protect the child rather than a faceless, nameless culture or religion that is undeserving of protection. Religious rights cannot supersede human rights. And I hope they will understand that doing so is not only gross and racist, but it is inhumane. Right? I mean, I think that's what I want to leave on is this hope that love will still prevail.
Yes, yes.
That good will triumph evil, that a sanctity of life culture is the better way to go. And if people can just pause and remove themselves from ideologies and slogans, like you always talk about, dogmas,
Yes, yes, yes.
right? That we will see the individual worth and dignity of each of us individually. And that's the way I like to, look at my relationships, is through that lens of love, hope, the sanctity of life. I don't know. What are your guys' closing thoughts? Because this is our last recording before we actually get to meet Yasmine and ask her about all the topics we discussed over the
True.
last,
Sure.
3 sessions. Um,
I think love is the most powerful four-letter word in the English language. I think that love is why we're all here today. And love is sort of our North Star as we continue in our work to further the values and attitudes of classical liberalism. To me, it just comes down to feeling. Do I feel more a part of the universe if I relish in love, or do I feel more affirmed if I seek power as a life goal? Love, hands down. Love will always make us better humans. I think power just sort of flattens our identity and our existence in this beautiful, nuanced, complex universe. Those are my closing thoughts.
it's beautiful. Mars, any last thoughts on all of this?
I think ultimately that's the reason you have that's the ultimate reason for existing in life. Like I don't want to say I completely ascribe to utilitarianism, but like if it's about finding the greatest happiness and enhancing it for yourself and other people, what other happiness is there to know that you're living in an environment where you're loved, you have people who look out for you, who want the best for you, and they want to do and they want to do so in a very in a way that's couched in reason. And that's ultimately my North Star. Is like, I think that this kind of moral system we have that's constantly evolving, that's heading towards that direction, however imperfectly, is one that we should strive to fight for. And Yasmin's story, along with that of Ayaan Hirsi Ali's, Asra's, and so many other ex and former, so many ex and progressive Muslims like who push forward in this direction with us. There's a reason why we do it. These systems that allow for pluralism, that allow for a diversity of thought and a cohesive culture in which the sanctity of the individual is sacred. This is the way to go, not by pushing ideas that ultimately that lead to suffering, and definitely not entertaining people who use a lot of, excuse my French, a lot of mental masturbatory techniques to keep them into play. And that's ultimately why I'm here.
Yeah, I think we all are. I think that's what brought us all together. And under the goal, I hope, of really uplifting what classical liberal values really mean, and I think love is at the core of that. Well, on that note, I hope the rest of you guys can join us on March 2nd at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, when we get to do a live stream with Yasmine Mohammed, the author of Unveiled. Till then,